And it's 5, 4 here in the Himalayas. 3, 2, 1.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Tell the Damn Story, the show that celebrates the trials and tribulations, the successes and failures of the writing journey in hopes of making your writing journey that much easier. I'm Chris Ryan, award-winning hybrid writer, and he's Alex Simmons, award-winning writer of classic characters like Sherlock Holmes, Scooby-Doo, Archie, Batman, and his own 1930s soldier of fortune, Aaron Blackjack Day. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing and examining classic writing. And we're going to use 3 areas. What 3 areas are we going to use?
3 areas, in particular, those 3. And by the way, hi there, Chris. In particular, those 3 areas will be film, novels, and comics. And specifically in the books, we're going to be talking about Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. In films, we're going to be talking about 12 Angry Men by Mr. Rose. We'll talk more about that in a minute, and that's the film. And then in comics, we're going to be talking about What's Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, a Superman story written by Joe Kelly.
Cool, very cool.
Yes.
And we hope that by looking at all these, you'll start to see a glimpse of how good writing works.
Absolutely.
That's a tall order. Let's see if we can do it.
Yes. Yes. Let's go to the videotape.
All right, Alex, tell me a little bit about your old buddy Ray Bradbury and Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Chris often remarks on my Wayback Machine. So yes, we're going way back because Ray Bradbury wrote the story, the book, Something Wicked This Way Comes in 1954. So this is back then, for those of you who are 20-something or slightly older. And it was what's considered a fantastical, it's not a horror story, it's not science fiction, it's more of a fantastic fantasy, somewhat supernatural thriller. And it focuses on 2 boys who grew up in this sort of idyllic American town, and they're young, they're around 11 years of age. They are neighbors, they're right next door to each other. They were born on the same night, but a matter of moments apart. And it's a little bit of an investigation into the soul and the spirit of people and what makes one go in one direction and one in another. Are we inclined and possibly more easily seduced by good or evil, depending on our nature or when we're born, any of that sort of thing? And Bradbury really did a really wonderful job with it. And the reason that I picked this story, aside from the fact that it's well written and it's Ray Bradbury, is that upon reading this at a young age, I was like, wow, this is so fantastic and everything. And then reading it again in my young adult years, I suddenly realized the way that he opens this piece, the flow of words, the combination of words to create imagery and character development made me really commit at that moment to wanting to be a writer. I wanted to be able to tell stories the same way that this man did. And I'm still striving for that all these years later. But it was a major inspiration for me, as well as a piece of wonderful and entertaining fiction. And why this works so well is part of what we're going to talk about.
First thing I'd like to know is that you say 2 boys, 11, 12 years old, right? 10, 11, 12, something like that. But I have never heard Something Wicked This Way Comes as being limited to a YA or young reader audience. This is, you can be 10 to 110, and this story will work for you. You also mentioned the opening. What can you tell us about the opening that pulls us in so well?
Part of good writing, a sign of good writing, is understanding what your job is when you start a story, whether it's a book or a film or a play even, is the first thing that you're supposed to do is introduce us to the world. That meaning that world that we're in, that the story takes place in. And then you're going to introduce us to the character, and then some of the setup, and maybe even a peek at the conflict. That's the opening scenes. And he does this so brilliantly because we get immediately this sense of, it's not suburban, it's a small town. It's maybe, I don't know, depends on where people live who are listening to this, but try and imagine the city's far away. It's miles away. It's maybe you got to get on a train or you got to drive for 2, 3 hours, something to get to the city. So there's mountains, there's trees, and there's a town, and it's an old town. It's a town that at least maybe 4 or 5 generations have grown up in. And these two young boys are living that life. They go to school, they play, and they get to run around out in the woods and everything. And there's not a lot of fear involved in their lives. And all of this is set up in just a simple description of a bit of the terrain, a little bit of the sense of the time, and then this wonderful line, the seller of lightning rods made his way. And it's just the seller of lightning rods. This is like the lightning rod salesman. It's not that. It's the seller of lightning rods. And just immediately you get this image of this guy. Maybe he's walking, maybe he's driving. I don't know. But for some reason, I get this image of this guy. He's a lone salesperson. He's probably like a Willie, death of a salesman. Willie, help me out here.
Oh, Willie Loman.
Thank you, Willie Loman. You get this feeling like he's lugging these satchels of lightning rods. What an element to be selling. It's not like encyclopedias, videos, vacuum cleaners, lightning rods. And just the way he sets that up, you're curious, what kind of a life is it? And then eases you in to this character's state of mind and being, which is rather, he's concerned, he's scared, he's worried. It's almost like something's following him. And he wants to sell, he desperately wants to get this lightning rod to this young boy. He says, you need this on your house. You need this on your, and the kid's going, yeah, it's a lightning rod. He says, no, you need, here, take it. He doesn't even force the money issue. He says, here, you got to have it. You're going to need it. And the kid takes the lightning rod and the salesman goes off. The seller goes off. So it's not about the money. So what is it? What is stalking him? And what is it that he's so fearful of that he has given this item to this kid for protection? And that's just the opening of the piece.
Now, in just your discussion of it, I'm hooked and the thing that hooked me is that the seller gave away what he's selling.
Mm-hmm.
That to me raises the stakes. And that it's a lightning rod, which when he says, you need this, you think, all right, lightning's coming. So we have life and death stakes, even though the kid may not understand that. And we have truly odd behavior.
Right.
Where it goes from there.
It picks up, it sets that up. So already something's coming. And then you get a little bit more of the boys' lives, because again, they're next door neighbors. Their houses are right next to each other.
So did both boys get a lightning rod or just
no,
one?
just one. Just one.
Not the other.
Yeah.
Screw him.
Yeah. And then they're caught up again in the wonder of it's October, by the way. It's not Halloween, it's October. And so they're expecting certain things to be going on, but basically it's still school and stuff like that. And then they find out that there's a circus coming. And some advanced scouts, if you will, from the circus are going through the town announcing that the circus is going to be coming. And there's even a little something slightly off about that. And so once again, you're building slowly these moments of apprehension. And these two boys, these two young innocents who are just, like I said, living their life in the fall in this country town with people that they know, people they've known since they were little children, this barber and that store owner. And so it's very familiar territory, and yet something unfamiliar is about to happen. And so you're being pulled in, you're being drawn in before anything really blows up. Stephen King does this very well in Salem's Lot. He invites you into this town and he gets you to a point of feeling very familiar with some of these characters before the terror starts.
Yeah, it's the idea of setting up the norm. And Salem's Lot happens to be a great study of small town life.
Mm-hmm.
And then one thing off is introduced, much like in Bradbury's story here. This is almost all American life, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite the city, not quite the country, kind of suburban, middle of the road, Nothing extraordinary about these kids. And talk about well-named story too.
Mm.
We don't even get any sense of wicked to go from the story, from the title, something wicked this way comes. The seller of lightning rod comes. He's coming to town. He goes through, gives this kid, "You're going to need this." No explanation. And then the circus shows up, and that what do you, the advanced team, but it's old time team, not current. And even that, there's nothing there, arguably, that is horrifying.
No, not yet. Not
But
yet.
there's just enough questions to make you turn the page. And that's the lesson for prose. How do you get them to turn the page?
Yeah.
Whether the end of the page has a little bit of a tease that, or middle of a conversation, so you're turning to the next page, or if there's just enough going on to say, wait a second, that's weird.
Yeah.
Why is that happening?
And
And that's what we get here.
the next thing that he does so well in this story, and then you brought it up a moment ago about there's no age limit. It's not like it's a YA novel or a young reader's novel or anything. No, this anybody can read this. Is as the story unfolds and the wickedness begins to reveal itself, it's some of the people in the town that you begin to learn something about, or that they fear something from their past. And so there's a reveal, or I should say, a steady stream of reveals that are affecting the adults. And the kids are seeing this and being more and more pulled into this thing that's happening, this strange, bizarre, and then slowly but surely a scary thing that's happening. And it's involving the adults as well as, and I'll use this term, to some degree, a seduction of innocent or innocence.
We can see how that will pull us in on a continuous basis. And I will thank you not to call me Shirley, by the way, but this old joke, I'm so sorry. But then what we would suggest is that people check this book out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And give it a
Not the
read,
movie,
because
the book.
the
Yeah.
book, the
Yeah.
book. This is the book's
Yeah.
suggestion.
Yes.
And really enjoy. There's that idea of reading it twice, right?
Mhm.
But even if you read it for enjoyment and then think back on it, okay, they were talking about introducing and hooking, but how did it sustain? And we'd love to hear comments from you
Yeah.
about Ray Bradbury's Something This Wicked This Way Comes, and what worked for you, what made it stand out as an example of writing.
Absolutely.
Nicely done there, Mr. Simmons.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you. It's again, it means a lot to me. And I got to meet Ray at one point in my life and thank him for the inspiration that sent me more fervently onto my path, my creative path.
And was he gracious, or did he say, "Don't blame me"? No.
No, Ray was Ray, which is a full-blown, eclectic, funny, bigger than life kind of guy sitting there in a concierge, no, not concierge, it was a cafeteria area at a big Comic-Con, and I think it was, I want to say Oakland. It wasn't San Diego, so I think it was Oakland, California, and I had the chance to meet him. And just to do this sort of circle of life kind of thing for a quick moment, he inspired me years ago, and so I followed my path. And I wound up writing a number of things, one of them being my original series, Blackjack, about this African-American soldier of fortune. Years later, as I'm at this convention and I see him coming along, he's being taken care of by two younger people who are there to make sure he has whatever he needs. And at that point, he was in a wheelchair. And so the people don't get the wrong image of, oh, this poor dying woman. Ray is in bright, blinding white Bermuda shorts with matching white suspenders and this electric blue button-up shirt open at the neck. And he's got shocking white hair. So this guy, you see him from a distance, right? And he's quite, so they're wheeling him along. They're going to take him to this area of the food court so that he can get something to eat. And I so wanted to thank him for his writing and thank him for, again, the inspiration. So one of the attendants is looking after him while the other one has separated for a moment. So I go over to the one who's away from the group, and I approach him and I said, "Look, I don't want to bother Mr. Bradbury or anything, but if I could have an opportunity to speak to him." And as I'm trying to explain how simple, clean, important it's not an autograph, I just want to thank him. The
Right.
young man I'm talking to says, "You're Alex Simmons. Yeah, you wrote Blackjack." I went, "Yeah, I did. Oh man, I love that series, right?" So I'm thinking, "Oh, son of a gun." So this is great. So then I'm talking. He says, "Yeah, but I don't know if my boss here, the young woman who's with Ray right now. I don't know if she's going to let come over. We don't want him to be disturbed and everything." Meanwhile, she's circling us to check in on what's going on. So I'm aware of her passing around behind me, and he's still talking. And she gets on this side of it, and he sees her, and he goes, "Oh, look, so and so. This is Alex Simmons." And, "Oh, I know Alex." I'm thinking, "You do?" And she says, "Yeah, Alex, when you started publishing Blackjack, you wrote a series of articles in Wizard Magazine about self-publishing and independent publishing and everything. And I read them and I wrote you some questions and you answered them." I went, "Oh, okay. Did you use your name?" She says, "No, it was my email." I said, "Oh, thank you. That's why I don't recognize your name." We talked for a few. She said, "Thank you so much for that." She said, "You want to meet Ray? Come on."
Cool.
And so that circle of him inspiring me to become a writer, my doing some writing, which then influenced these two people who were in a position to help me meet him and thank him. So that was
Right. But
one
we're
of the
gonna
universe does.
I'm going to just underscore that woman was excited to recognize Alex because Alex did his standard signature generosity. So yes, write. Yes, get your stories out there. But if you are so lucky as to have someone interested enough in your work to want to talk to you about it or want to ask you a question about it, listen, answer well, and thank them
Yes. And then I
because
up into the sunset.
you too can experience the circle of life from
Yeah.
Alex Simmons.
So anyway,
Hey,
that's not
let's
my Bradbury moment. Yeah.
that's beautiful. Now, Alex, let's go to the movies.
Yes,
Can
let's
you
go to the
talk
movie. I'll get
about an
popcorn.
example of classic writing that we can find in film? Now, you can argue 1,000 films, but you have to choose one because this show doesn't go on forever. What did you choose, sir? And off you go.
We're still in the Wayback Machine, but we're going to jump forward 3 years. So we went from 1954, the writing of Something Wicked, to 1957, to a film called 12 Angry Men. And this is based on,
Classic.
this is based on a teleplay, which was written a little before that by Reginald Rose, who the teleplay was produced on CBS television, the CBS Playhouse, I believe it was, and did so well that eventually Mr. Rose did a screenplay adaptation of it, and that was produced starring Henry Fonda and a cast of 11 really strong character actors.
Yeah.
And that was 1957. So 12 Angry Men, to just summarize it very briefly, you are literally pulled into a courtroom where a young teenage boy, Hispanic boy, has been accused of murdering his father. And we don't get to see the whole trial. We come in, all of the evidence has been presented. Both sides have had their say, defense and prosecution have had their say. And the judge is doing the summation before the jury of 12 white men are going to be sent to the jury room to deliberate, to discuss the case and decide whether or not the boy is guilty or innocent. And if he is found guilty, he will be executed. There is no leniency. There's no life sentence. The judge makes sure they understand that if you find him guilty, and it must be a unanimous vote, this boy will be executed. And so then he sends them off to the room. They get up and they clumsily meander out of the courtroom and into this small room with this conference table and a seating for 12. And that's where the vast majority of the film stays.
Okay.
And it's ultimately, one would think, oh, okay, so it's a murder mystery.
Right.
Not really.
Because the murder happened, we don't
We
see
don't get to
that.
see
We
the
don't
murder.
talk about that. What
Right.
we do find is this Hispanic kid, Latin kid, die
Yeah. He will
based on these
die.
12 people.
Yeah. And so, again, we're within the first few moments of this story, but we've been brought to the courthouse. We've seen a smidgen of the process of the law in action. And now these 12 people have this boy's life in their hands, and they
Well,
get into this room.
let me ask you
And
a question.
literally, the visual storytelling,
Well,
the
let me.
screenplay is very specific, but then there's some changes between what was written on the page and what we see on the screen just in the first 11 minutes of the film. But the visuals show us so much about several of these jurors before they ever get to start talking. And some of that is so key to what's about to happen in this room over the next 85 minutes of this film. And it's so well constructed because visually, you are given a sense of what's at stake, where it's happening. And even the visual angle of the first shot is we're looking at the front of the courthouse and we're facing the steps, and the camera angles up. So we're looking up at the top of the courthouse. And then it does a quick cut to where we're inside the courthouse looking down on the lobby, way like another story down, and we're seeing these people coming in, various purposes and so forth. And then we eventually make our way to the courtroom where this case is being tried. And we're getting glimpses of people, ordinary people, average people, caught up in the webs of the criminal justice system for good or for, in this case, possibly the punishment of evil. And so, with all of this set up, and knowing this boy's life is at stake, life or death is really what they're in there to decide. They do this, and I'm not going to, it's not a spoiler here. The moment they sit down, the jury foreman says, do we want to take a vote just to see where we stand now? And there's some responses, which again are very telling about where some of these characters, some of these jurors, where their heads are at this moment. So they all, yeah, let's take a vote. And he says, okay, all who feel he's guilty, raise your hands. And 11 hands go up. And he counts them off, and he seems like dumbfounded. And
You're
he says,
thinking, wow,
okay,
wow,
hands
short film.
down. He says, and all not guilty, and one hand goes up. And that's the setup. That's the catalyst for everything else that's going to happen in this room. And it's a great character study piece because each one of these men has come to this room with his own history and baggage. And literally, that baggage, that history, those preconceptions, those assumptions are so much a factor in where their heads are regarding the guilt or innocence of this teenage boy.
Now, I want to get more into that, but let's talk that what I hear so far is a double hook,
Hmm,
right? There's the justice is the setting, right? That's where it is. And justice is in this courtroom, and then justice is in this court. And then we hear very quickly this boy accused of murdering his father. You're going to decide. And now it went from justice to courthouse to courtroom to 12 people. So that really reduces what his life is hanging by. It's
mm-hmm,
hanging by 12 people,
mm-hmm.
right? And then a quick count. Oh no, it's hanging by one. So very quickly the stakes rise. Now I want to ask you to spend some time with the introduction, even if you just use two, the
Mm-hmm.
introduction of these characters. Maybe we can use one that votes guilty, and maybe we can talk about the guy who is,
Sure.
voting non-guilty. Give us an example of how this film and this script by the screenwriter, either or, lets us see a character who, like everything this person does, suggests,
There's a great
quick
example.
guilt and we're out. So
Yeah,
give us
there's a
that one.
great, perfect example of that. And I will preface this by saying I know some of this is in the script, and some of this definitely has to do with the director and the actor involved. But there's one juror who we see while the judge is giving his summation or his instructions rather. This juror is looking at his watch. He looks at his watch and he's fidgeting and he looks at his watch again. When they cut and they're now entering the jury room, everyone else meanders in, and maybe they take off their jackets, they undo their ties, they light up a cigarette, they go look out the window. One of them runs to the bathroom. This guy comes in, looks up at the fan, which is not working, and there's some sense of it's a hot day. He then goes up to the back of the room, and we can see the length of the room. So we can see this. Goes to the back of the room to where the open closet is. People have they're hanging their jackets and things there. And he reaches up onto a shelf and grabs his hat, puts it on.
So while everyone is taking a jacket off, he's putting a hat on.
He then goes to the left to a water cooler, and there's a stack of cone-shaped paper cups. He takes one off the top, fills it with some water, takes a sip or two. The bailiff comes around to check, make sure this man's name is on there. It's just make sure he's there. And he points to where his name is. And you see the bailiff check it off. The guy finishes drinking the water and puts the cup back on the stack. And then wanders back down to the fan. And then seconds later, the foreman begins to try and call everything
All right,
to order.
so let's read into the imagery. Okay, him putting on the hat, what's it mean to you?
Obviously, he's ready to go.
All right.
Between looking
Drinking
at his
the water.
watch and putting on his hat, he's ready.
He's got some place to go.
Yep.
And maybe we find out where it is, maybe we don't. He drinks the water and then he puts it back on the pile, or back in the stack. What's that say to you? What's it say to
This
you?
guy's a slob. He's an inconsiderate slob.
Right. Self-centered.
Yeah.
Right. Do we eventually find out where he wants to go?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So his wife is dying of cancer. Something
No,
that pressing.
nothing so important. Nothing so heavy. Nothing so
What
deep.
does he want to do?
He wants to go to a baseball game. He's got tickets.
So there you go. So even more selfish, right? So the kid's life is hanging in the balance, and this guy wants to go to the ball game. So let's do a rush, yes, and we're out of here.
Yep.
Okay. So it suggests, again, that's a great hook. Man's inhumanity to man, as mundane, that guy's behavior is. That's really what it's reverberating with.
Mm-hmm.
How about the one lone not guilty vote? Do we get a sense of his
perfect? And it's perfect because he's not initially saying the boy's not guilty. He says, I don't know if he's guilty or not. I need to talk about this.
I love that because it's not a one vote, it's a half a vote.
Yeah.
Again, you're putting that kid in more and more peril with each of these little details.
I'm not saying he's absolutely innocent. I'm saying, I don't know. I think we should talk about it. We need to talk about it. And
so what do we know about this
to talk about? He's guilty. Is it? No. And there's one more subtle thing. There's one more subtle thing that, again, could be in the script, because it does talk about the hands going up in the script, but the pacing of how the hands go up. When the foreman takes that first vote, 3 or 4 hands go up immediately. You see another 2 hands or 3 hands go up a little bit behind that. And then you see 2 hands creep up as they're noticing that everyone else is.
Right. So they're just folding.
They're influenced by. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's, again, all within the first 11 minutes or so of the film.
Right.
It is setting everything up. And like I said, again, they come to the table, they come to that room, they come there with their history, their family situations, their life choices, their personal opinions, and so forth. And all of that is weighing in on whether or not this boy lives or dies. And the character development in this script for 1957 is just really well done. There's even a bit of the racial issue established in there, so that we understand that, it's a Hispanic kid out there. And somebody in this room is thinking, oh yeah, he's guilty.
Oh yeah. And it's
come on.
What's the big deal?
Yeah. What's there even to decide?
Right? Racism embedded into the personalities of some of the jurors. Yeah. Again, the implicit suggestion is to seek out 12 Angry Men, the 1957 version.
Yeah, the film.
and
Yeah.
sit down and watch that. And we'd love to see some commentary on other characters that drew you in, or other excellent moments that make this classic writing for you.
And
Love
I
to
would
see
add
that.
two things too. You can hunt up a copy of the script online for free.
Hmm.
You should
Hmm.
read it, because another lesson there is the difference between what's written on the page by the writer
Yeah.
and what happens when that script is placed in the hands of the director and the actors.
Yeah. And there are some times where a line written on a page is strong enough, but then going through an actor, it becomes something more.
Yeah.
And that's always worth seeing,
And
you
also
know?
remember that, especially I say this for people who are writing short stories or novels that eventually find themselves in a position where there's an adaptation of their work. Even
Right.
if we're not talking mainstream Hollywood or anything like that, someone else is going to do a film version of your story.
Right.
Film is a visual medium, and oh yes, there are also words. And so there's so much that you can do by show, not tell. And when you take your script, if you're doing the adaptation, as some people have been in the position to do, they still have to learn, what do I leave out that was in the book?
Right.
Scenes or dialogue do I leave out? What moments do I have them saying in the book or I have described in the book that the camera can just show it like that?
True.
How can I layer? Because I've got some layered subtext and
Right.
things going on here. What's that look like here in film? How's that going to be interpreted or reinterpreted in film? So there are adjustments that will be made when you transition
Oh
from
yeah.
this medium to
Right.
this medium.
Right.
And
And
that, in reading the script for 12 Angry Men and then watching the 1957 film, I think you'll get several good lessons with that.
and it's really interesting that we structured this episode today. And if you're enjoying this episode, make sure you hit and subscribe, because that'll keep us off the streets.
Maybe.
That we began talking about a book, novels, right? Prose writing, where the author is author uber alles, right? It is the author's vision from beginning to end. And then in film, author, director, cinematographer, and actors. So
Hmm.
you get to see more of a group effort. And in the best of times, that works fabulously well. And there's other, sometime in the future, we'll do bad transition into film episode, and we'll talk about that whole
Yeah.
different day.
Yeah.
But then you had put into the structure an example from comic books,
Yeah.
and that's brilliant, because there's the writer who's writing more visually, more cinema. It's a segmented kind of writing where the description is followed out by whatever dialogue or sound effects, but it's visual driven and then dialogue. You're writing really first for the artist to see what you'd like to see, but then it's
Hmm.
the artist's interpretation. So we have an example here where that worked extraordinarily well. And
Yes,
while
we
there are
do.
tons of examples of classic comics, this is a might be a lesser known one, but well worth searching out. And once more, ladies and gentlemen, we unleash the power, the emotional savagery, the aesthetic poetics that is Alex
Oh my God.
Simmons.
Oh man. Yeah, we'll be back after a word from our sponsor. No. Okay. So this last piece is a Superman comic. For those of you who don't read Superman comics, you should read this one. It's Superman Action Comics number 775, and it was actually published in 2001, but it's
So
been
fairly
mostly.
recent for you.
Yep.
It's
So yeah, so we've come
practically
from
yesterday for
57.
you,
Yeah, we've come forward from 1957 to 2001.
to
And it's
this
also
century.
Yes, it's yeah, yeah, I'm going to hurt you later. And it's also been collected in a recent Best Stories of Superman, which
Right.
came out, I think it was last year or beginning of this year.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's the story is called What's Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. And the first thing I will say about that is that line, actually, I believe that line is inspired by the line, the introduction line from the original 1950s, late 1950s Superman TV series, who's a Superman who fights for truth, justice, and the American way, and the flags waving. This is the intro to that TV series. But it's written by this comic book.
Hold on, one second, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
It, I think it's a hybrid inspiration. Yes, the TV series Truth, Justice, the American Way, but I think the other inspiration is an Elvis Costello songs from the very, very early 80s. What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? So
Ah,
you have the beginning and then you have the Superman ending there. And that's where I think we get that
and
from.
we'll get Elvis and the writer of this comic book on the show sometime. We'll talk to
To
them
see
both about it.
whether we're right or not.
Yeah. So the writer of the comic book story, What's Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, is Joe Kelly, who's got a line of credits that just go on forever.
Sure.
And the penciler, because Chris did point out the fact that we have the writer and then we have the penciler or the illustrators who are involved in this. So
Mhm.
the penciler is Doug Mankey and Lee, and I'm not going to get his name, but I believe it's Bermejo, Bermejo, and it was inked by Tom Nguyen, and Dexter and a couple of other people seem to have gotten in there because I guess it was a lot of work involved. But the story is really interesting because again, Superman's been referred to as the Boy Scout, meaning he's the goody two shoes kid. Of course, you make fun of somebody like Superman. He's got powers. He can't hurt you, but he's a good guy. So he's basically trying to do the right thing all the time. And as in particular, as the 1990s comic book land began to become darker and darker with a lot of our heroes, the big blue Boy Scout stood out. So I'm like, Superman, why don't you just wipe out some of these threats? Why don't you just destroy some of these people? Why don't you just kill some of these people? You got the power. Then we don't have to worry about them coming back. Same thing had been said to Batman. Why don't you kill the Joker? Why don't you kill some of these people that are constantly escaping and coming back? So in this particular story, there's a group of superpowered vigilantes, if you want to call them that, who decide to start taking down some of these villains and super creatures that are plaguing the land and killing them, just wiping them out. And what's happened is the population, certain degree of the citizenry is going, yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we don't have to worry about this monster again. We don't have to worry about this psycho killer anymore. This is what we need. Superman, you should be doing this. And Superman's going, no, with all this power, we don't have the right to be judge, jury, and executioner. And he keeps trying to stop these guys from doing this. He keeps trying to talk to them and trying to get them to understand. And basically, their leader has this attitude like, come on, man, you're old. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay, now you're a bit of an annoyance. Okay, stay out of our face. And finally, he says, okay, Superman, you've become the problem now. If we take you out, then we don't have to deal with this nonsense anymore. And we can continue doing what obviously the world population wants us to do. So you're dead. And Soup's going, really? Okay, it's come down to this. We can't talk this out. No. And what's great about this is Superman is not cocky about this. He's not thinking, oh, I'm Superman, I can take these fools. He's seen what they can do. And this story is written at a time when the Superman storyline had him married to Lois Lane.
Right.
So there's this wonderful scene in the night before the showdown where Lois realizes that Superman doesn't know if he can take him, that he's actually facing the possibility of going out there and being killed. And she's saying, look, why don't you just, and he says, no, I can't. I've got to face them. I've got to, in effect, stand up for what I say I believe in.
Right.
And this is total high noon to reference another old film. This is
It was only a
Gary
matter
Cooper.
of time, ladies and gents.
Yeah, this is Gary Cooper in High Noon. This is that
Right.
moment where the town's not going to be there for him, and he's got to face down I think it's four killers by himself. He thought he was going to have help. Nope, nope,
And
no support there.
and he has to do it
Yeah,
to protect what he believes in.
yeah, absolutely. He
He
had
could
because people are
very
saying run. People are
right.
saying to Gary Cooper's character, run, leave
Right.
town, go, get out of here.
And since we're the subject here is the Superman, we know that he could kill them.
Yeah. We
So,
don't we know that he could kill. He has the power to kill, but we don't know that he's going to go that far. We do know that they will, and
well,
they fully intend to do that.
for me, that is the reason to own that comic. That's the reason to cherish that comic because it is truth, it is justice, it is the idea of America, that American way,
Mm.
that we hold tremendous power. And in the best of circumstances, the idea of America is that we don't exploit that power. We use it for the best good we can. It's fascinating that as every other era, since at least I'd say probably as far back as the Civil War, probably as far back as probably the birth of the nation, there have been people who have very different interpretation of what truth means,
Mm.
what justice is, and
Mm.
what the American way should be.
Mm-hmm.
But Superman has been very much a metaphor for the best ideals of the idea of America, right?
He
And
has definitely been that, and more so. If I want to take the flag off for just a second, there's an ethical and moral code that human beings should live by, and some don't, and that's going to be the way the pendulum's always going to swing. But when you put the flag on that, yeah, he has stood for him. He's an alien. He's an immigrant,
right,
from outer space. He's an immigrant. He's come to this country to try and make the best life for himself he can. Now, granted, he didn't have anything to say about that because he was a baby when he got here. But the people who raised him were born here, and they instilled a certain amount of ethics and moral compass in him.
mhm,
I think some of that was in there already, but nevertheless, this is how he was brought up. This is what he was brought up to believe. And over his years of encountering tremendous adversity, he has proven to himself more often than not, I have to draw this line in the sand because, yes, I am actually capable of doing horrible things if I cut loose. And
but
I'm
am I
choosing,
capable,
yeah,
right?
I'm
Am I
choosing
capable of
not to. I'm,
holding to that moral code
yeah,
and still solving and addressing the ill of the day?
right.
A great comic, a great character, and that belief in the idea of America is tested daily, and it's tested in 2024 multiple times a day. And sometimes we see where we're doing well, and sometimes we see where it's getting its ass kicked. Great tale for then, way back in 2001. Great tale for 2024.
Absolutely.
And
And
that's why we're here, ladies and
the only
gentlemen.
other thing I would say about it is actually there's so many other things I could say, but one I want to say is that it's a one shot story. It's a one issue story. And so it's completely brought from inciting incident to conclusion within those 20 some odd pages. And to me, a very satisfying conclusion. It is, again, the whole thing of understanding that I'm going to face potential death. I am facing also the question of do I stand for what I believe in, what I say I believe in? And if I
Right.
do, okay, then here's where I prove that. Whether
And
I'm still standing at the end of this or not, here's where I prove it.
and another thing, in each one of these examples, there is the other side. I'm less conversant in the other side of Bradbury's piece,
Mhm.
but those voting guilty in 12 Angry Men, or those heroes who are going further than Superman believes is just. The great thing about a story is when that other side is argued reasonably and with some justification, so that you really have to dig in on what you as the audience believe and choose who you think is right. And that's one of the things that story does for us. It allows us to review what we believe and check ourselves.
I would say that the Bradbury story absolutely resonates on that level because I mentioned earlier about a seduction of innocence. It's actually a seduction on several levels. The innocent one being the one of the two boys, but some of the townspeople, what happens to them is because of wickedness, the embodiment of the wickedness that comes to this town offers them a temptation that some of them can't turn down. And it should be, do I go this way or do I not? Do I stand by my ethical code or do I? But this is so promising. This is what you've always wanted. Do you cut a deal with the devil? And so that's very much there. It resonates in each one of these stories. We have choices every day of our lives, whether we're dealing with the fantastic, criminal law and justice, or super creatures. We make certain choices every day about where we're going to move or go or say or believe. And these stories really hone in on what's at stake when we are placed in that position. And I think, again, hats off to Ray Bradbury, to Reginald Rose, to Joe Kelly for constructing great stories over what, a 60 some odd year span,
Yeah.
and in 3 different mediums.
And we wanted to give you different mediums because different people in our audience are pursuing one or the other. And one of the best ways to learn how to express yourself and your deepest beliefs and all that is to see how others did it so well. So
Yeah.
we encourage you to check that out, at least one of these. All
Yeah.
3 would be great. And read it for enjoyment. Always read it for enjoyment, but go back and say, why did this work? When we gave you some hints, but as you go through these, you'll see that they succeed from page 1, line 1 to the very last page, the very last word. And that is worth experiencing.
Absolutely. Oh, that was fun for me, Chris.
There you go. Yes. Again, tell the damn story. These 3 definitely did. It's a good way to help you tell your damn story by seeing how the masters tell theirs.
Yeah. And be with us next week.
When we do something.
Yeah, because we always do.
And it'll be something.
Yeah, and it'll be
woo,
something worth
it'll be like,
watching us do. Yes.
I'm so glad I stopped by, is what we hope you would say.
Yeah. So remember to, I'm going to do it this time, Chris, to like and subscribe, you know, because that way you'll always know what we're doing. Because we don't.
That's right, ladies and gents.
Chris, as always, a pleasure.
Peace, brother.
Take care, everybody.
Peace to all of you, and we'll tell your own stories.
You got it. Bye-bye, everybody.
Damned or otherwise.